welcome you all to today's discussion on a very important and contemporary theme, ethics of AI in education. How can we balance innovation with responsibility? We're at the turning point of the evolution of education, where artificial intelligence is not just a future possibility, but it is an immediate presence in our classrooms, curriculums, and educational policy. Now, Indian government actively invested in this transformation, where Union Budget of 2025 allocated 500 crores for setting up a center of excellence in AI in education, aiming to boost personalized learning and workforce readiness. So, in contexts like India, where there are large class sizes, teacher shortages, and vast learner diversity, AI offers big promises of multilingual content delivery, personalizing learning, adaptive learning, and automation of administrative tasks. But it is in these very settings, which are also disadvantaged due to low resources, patchy digital infrastructure, and where regulatory safeguards are often weak, that the risks of AI driven exclusion, surveillance, or algorithmic biases are deeply concerning. So while AID adoption in India is at early stages, it is rapidly gaining momentum, and it is an opportune time for us to ask critical questions like how to anticipate and mitigate risks, how to design inclusive and accountable systems, what robust frameworks to adopt for data privacy, how to train teachers and ensure equitable access. This development dialogue by ORF's Center for New Economic Diplomacy will help us answer these pressing questions with nuance and figure out a balanced middle path where AI in education is neither rejected based on fear nor blindly embraced, but is deliberately shaped with purpose, responsibility, and inclusion. Now, with this background, I'll introduce my esteemed panelists for today. Dr. Bashir Ahmad Shadrack. He's a globally respected expert in digital inclusion, rural informatics, and pro-poor technology initiatives with a distinguished career spanning nearly 4 decades. He has served in leadership roles with international and regional organizations, including Telecenter.org Foundation, Open Knowledge Network, Transparency International, One World South Asia, and British Council. As a program lead at Canada's International Development Research Centre, he managed transformative ICT 4D projects across Asia. He led the Telecenter Women Digital Literacy campaign, reaching over 1 million women globally, and has worked across 40 plus countries. Currently, he serves as Director of the Commonwealth Educational Media Center for Asia and holds advisory roles with bodies such as Global Partnership on AI, FICCI, and Government of India Committees on Impact of AI on Higher Education Institutions, and Committee to Draft National Blended Learning Policy. Mr. Jen Shi Tang is Program Specialist Education with UNESCO South Asia Regional Office. Prior to this, he served as Program Specialist in ICT for Lifelong Learning at the UNESCO Institute for Lifelong Learning. He leads research and programmatic work on the use of AI, extended reality, and blockchain in lifelong learning and literary education, particularly for marginalized groups such as older persons, refugees, migrants, and internally displaced persons, and capacity building programs for digital skills and adult educators. He has worked with governments, international organizations, and private sector partners globally on national ICT in education policies, digital competencies, digital inequalities, gender equality, and skills development. Ms. Gauri Gupta, she's the director of EdTech at the Central Square Foundation. Her work focuses on strengthening the EdTech ecosystem by supporting contextual AI-enabled learning solutions, generating robust evidence, and developing public goods to enhance learning outcomes for underserved children. She also works closely with government to support effective policy and program implementation in educational technology. With over 2 decades of experience across strategy, program development, and implementation, she brings a rare blend of corporate and development sector expertise. Prior to her role at CSF, she was part of the leadership team at the NSDC, where she played a key role in shaping India's skilling agenda through public-private partnerships. She's also worked at the Boston Consulting Group. And then we have Mr. Anirban Sarma. He's the director of the Center for Digital Societies at the Observer Research Foundation. His research explores issues of technology policy with a focus on the digital economy, platform governance, digital public infrastructure, sectoral applications of ICTs, and the future of work. He was a chair for the Think 20 Task Force on Digital Affairs during the Indian and Brazilian G20 presidencies of 2023 and 24, respectively. Prior to ORF, Anirban was the Chief International Outreach and Communications Officer at the National Digital Library of India. He has also served at UNESCO, where he led organizations' initiative on tech for development across South Asia for nearly a decade. So welcome and thank you all for being a part of this panel. I look forward to your insights and perspectives. I've structured this panel in Q&A format, where I'll invite a specific speaker for each question. However, after they've shared their response, I encourage other panelists to contribute additional insights that they'd like to offer, and this way we can have a dynamic and engaging conversation. So to set the stage, I'll start with Dr. Shadrach. Sir, could you please share your perspective on what you see as the most promising opportunities of AI in education in India? And how do you see that these technologies help us leapfrog traditional educational barriers?
Thank you. Thank you for putting this panel together. It's a welcome opportunity for us to share some of our views. When it comes to India, as you would know, in the field of education, we have close to 300 million people who are active learners. We also have 600 million people who could potentially be lifelong learners. So the number is huge. In the formal system, we have 1.5 million teachers at the tertiary level and close to 9.5 million teachers at the school level. So again, the number is very huge. So the opportunity to exploit AI in education is also huge. Although we are latecomers, India in particular, as compared to some of the countries like China, Korea, the United States, and parts of Europe, we have that latecomer advantage. The problems are huge, but the opportunities are also out there. Now, one of the major opportunities I see is as much the EdTech companies and others would be quite interested in directly interacting with learners, I see the opportunity to work with teachers and faculty members who could potentially turn the AI-enabled outputs ethically, responsibly, and also something that is desirable for the larger ecosystem. And if you ask me who would be the ones that would easily be left out, teachers are the ones who would be left out. Faculty members are the ones who would be left out. But if we design our programs effectively, we can include them. What we call like the human in the loop AI, we call teachers in the loop AI, so that they can exploit AI not just as mere users, as steers and people who create, as I was mentioning to my colleagues, content, lesson plans, activity plans, and so on, which enable the learning to be much more joyful and interesting rather than rote learning. So that's the major opportunity I see today.
So just by way of introduction, at the Central Square Foundation, we are really trying to figure out how technology can be used to improve learning outcomes for our children, especially those who come from low-income backgrounds. So we all know, and we have this, massive education system in India. We have the private education system and we have the government education system, right? And I think enrollment between the two is, roughly similar. 50%, sometimes 50 to 48. So it keeps varying, but it's roughly similar. And there is obviously a lot of skepticism about the use of technology. There is, there is the fear that is it going to, further widen the divide? Is it further going to lead to inequity? But I just want to, give you a little bit of a example, right? And of how technology is really powerful, right? And can really democratize the quality of education. And then I will just plug in AI into it as well, right? So we've all gone to schools right? And families from middle and high income are sending their children to private schools. Those schools are well resourced. There are teachers, they have incentives to perform. The children get access to books on time. Parents at home are able to help their children with learning. They have all the manipulatives that you need, the Kumon, Jodo Gyans, whatever you name it, right, is available for to these children. Contrast this with, a family where parents are construction workers, they're sending their children to government schools, books are not necessarily reaching the children on time, there is a high level of teacher absenteeism, parents are not feeling empowered or saksham to educate their children, they have no resources to play around with at home, right? But they have access to that one device that exists at home, and that is their parents' phones. And that device can hold the same high quality digital resources which is available to the children going to the best and most expensive school in Delhi, right? And if those resources are contextualized and made available to them, that is the power of technology to be able to democratize quality. And with AI, I think there are some very, very interesting use cases that are emerging, as my co-panelist was mentioning. So what are the big challenges that we have in the education system, right? The one big challenge is that children are not necessarily at the learning level of their grade, right? And as a result of that, the highest capacity, most motivated teacher is not able to address that diversity. But EdTech, powered by AI, can personalize learning for a child. And that becomes a very compelling use case of AI, right? Similarly, the capacity, the ability of AI to provide that personalized coaching to the teacher, the ability of the teacher to be able to generate lesson plans, content that she can use in the classroom and transact better in the classroom becomes another compelling use case. And the third in my mind is assessments informed instruction, right? The ability of AI to, be able to do both formative and summative assessments, provide that feedback to the system so that teaching can be tailored. So in my mind, those are some of the very, very powerful use cases of AI in education. Thank you.
Thank you, Arpan, for inviting us to join the panel. I think, when you're talking about AI as a technology that is cross-sectoral, right? It's literally disrupting every part of our life. To be honest, AI has been around for a long time. Surely, I think many of the listeners here and the participants in the audience should know that AI as a field of study has been around for 60 odd years. So the reason why it has appeared to be particularly disruptive in the past, let's say 4 or 5 years, has really been because of extraneous technological developments, right? Computing power, storage, developments in algorithms and learning models, and also internet access and that huge amount of data that the internet has provided. But when we look at education, I would I would echo what the UNESCO's research has revealed, which is that education technology is not synonymous with benefits and positive impacts. So on this topic, just more generally about education technology, I would urge everyone to take a look at our UNESCO Global Education Monitoring Report 2023, which basically asks, education technology, it's a tool on whose terms? And one of the key findings of the research is that the discourse around education technology is very much guided by the industry and has been dominated by certain parts of the education ecosystem, technology ecosystem. And there's no uniform or agreed position on the benefits of technology. It really depends on the environment, as Gauri has already highlighted. It depends on how it's being used. It very much depends on, as Shadrach mentioned, the teachers are absolutely key to how technology is being used in the classroom. So I would just like to caution that the learnings that we've had from, let's say, the 1990s of digital technology till now can equally and should perhaps be even more cautiously applied to artificial intelligence. And I think secondly, one of the key findings is that technology has been designed by people. And who are the people who have designed it? And what kind of assumptions have guided these designs? And on this front, one of the key things that UNESCO has constantly found in its research as well is that technology is not inclusive by design. It's majority designed to benefit the majority who can afford certain types of devices, content, as well as overall infrastructure, right? And also a certain level of literacy, which Gauri already very rightly highlighted. In the India's context, is very important based on the NAS results, right? So I think we should also bear in mind that, yes, AI seems to offer a lot of opportunities, but it depends so much on the environment. And more often than not, education technology has increased divides in learning outcome across backgrounds and other characteristics of the learner. So I would just stop my answer right there. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Shakran, so for most of the previous technologies like electricity or television or even early computers, public debate rarely focused on ethics. The presumption was that technology is just a tool, an enabler. It is
also took place, but the debates were very different, largely from an economic point of view. But when it comes to AI, because it thrives on the existing data, and a large number of users who are not within the revolution, still outside the revolution, and also those who are within the revolution have to be dependent on data that's generated by somebody else. So there is obviously this fear and caution about data bias. And there are several examples one may cite with regard to how data could be quite biased, gender-wise or whatever, aspects. But we also have this debate about affordability and the costs involved in AI deployment and generation. Until and unless we see the benefits of AI, something similar to the PDI that we see in our normal life. So public digital infrastructure, particularly in India, has been quite successful because it's available to everyone to access. But when it comes to the AI-enabled deployed solutions, is that the case? Although we have all the problems in the world we can solve within this country, but still AI has not demonstrated its effectiveness in including the excluded. So that's a major issue. When it comes to data bias, there is also this question about accuracy and reliability of the information that's brought out. Now, the extreme use case would be what happens if, say, in the Canadian air ticketing situation, what happens if AI makes a mistake? Who do I sue? And if AI infuses a machine to commit something grave, how do we deal with this? So these issues also come up because although algorithms are written and then AI machines can train themselves in order to behave in a pattern that probably the original intention was not so. So there is a need for algorithm transparency and explainable AI, and governments are talking about standards and explainable AI principles and so on. So largely, I think the debate is around reliability, accuracy, data bias, and also who owns data today. Now, if four large companies would end up owning data, which is the fuel and oil and whatever you call it, for the further growth, now what happens? And rightly, I think the Indian AI India mission with the 10,300 crore commitment by the government is looking at startup ecosystem and also data sets as public good infrastructure, not just private infrastructure. But now 95% of the data is owned by certain handful private sector companies. So it's an issue because it's monetized. It's also, to a large extent, feeds to the current status quo, which is what we are all trying to fight in terms of making all this EdTech, ICT, AI opportunities available to everyone. So that's an issue, and that's where we find the need for ethics, responsiveness, and also ensuring that the stakeholdership is in command rather than corporations are in command. And if there is collusion between corporations and the governance systems, then people becomes mere subjects. So people have to really own data. And the person that I worked with who gave the web to the world, Sir Tim Berners-Lee, actually felt really highly saddened by the fact that the social media was steered by a handful of companies. So there's no data privacy, there's no data ownership of individuals, and their data is owned by somebody else and monetized. So how do we make the whole data ecosystem with people in control rather than somebody else? So these issues all combined make it compelling for us to talk about ethics in AI, responsible AI, and even in the context of education, we talk about it. UNESCO has come up with competencies for teachers and students. They are also working towards responsible AI with the India AI mission. So all these efforts are to ensure that things don't go out of hand, as simple as that.
What does it truly mean for AI to be responsible and human centered?
All right, sure. Before I try and define that, let me just give you a bit of context. Now, India's position on this matter, the question of innovation versus responsibility and ethics, is fairly clear. Now, we don't have an AI law yet, but a number of our policy guidelines, recommendations, internal government reports all emphasize that innovation must flourish, but absolutely not at the cost of ethics and responsible behavior. So we're clear on that. And there's, like I said, there's enough documentation to sort of reflect this position. A report from a MATI committee, for instance, talks about developing comprehensive guidelines on ethical issues such as fairness, transparency, accountability for AI solutions. You also have Niti Aayog's, much talked about report, which is called Towards Responsible AI for All, and another one called Operationalizing Principles for Responsible AI. And these, lay great emphasis on creating a trusted AI ecosystem, all right, and emphasizing time and again the need for responsible AI adoption. So I think we are clear where we are going with this, and this is a good pragmatic approach to take because this is really not the only approach you could have. In a completely different part of the world, in the United States now, for example, there's an overemphasis on unbridled innovation without enough responsibility and an ethical approach, right? I mean, ever since Trump came to power, for example, there's been an overturning of executive orders that privilege safety and guardrails. There's a great focus on global AI supremacy and domination and US leadership in the field of AI with deregulation occupying center stage, right? Which means, in effect, that the innovation of private sector companies could, in some cases, go unchecked, right? Now, this is clearly not the approach we want to take in India, and we aren't. And that's a good thing. Now, how do you define human-centric? responsible and human-centric AI is really a set of approaches and ethical principles that put human well-being at the center of AI design, delivery, and use. So that's how I define it. And in the context of responsible AI in education, which is really what we are discussing today, what we need are educational frameworks with 4 dimensions. And these 4 dimensions are anticipation, reflexivity, inclusion, which Dr. Shadrach spoke about, and responsiveness. And let me just expand a little on each of these. When we talk about anticipation, this is really about preempting some of the mishaps and bad things that could happen. So we need to do periodic risk assessments and reporting around EdTech platforms and what they're doing. There needs to be certain kinds of participatory knowledge gathering in advance of things actually going wrong, right? There also needs to be capacity building of enforcement authorities, cyber personnel of different kinds. Now, of course, we do have cybersecurity teams, but are they adequately sensitized about the way EdTech platforms operate? Probably not. So that's a bit of a gray area. Great. When it comes to reflexivity, this consists of things like certain obligations need to be imposed on EdTech platforms, so that they start embedding these technological ethics during product development itself. It shouldn't be done post-ante. It should be done by design from the very outset. Pedagogy assessment by experts. Experts do need to ensure that the syllabus, the curriculum, the design of pedagogy by AI tools is sort of up to scratch and safe for students to use. And then, of course, matters of algorithmic transparency, which, again, co-panelists talked about. Inclusion is very important. And, as Rian said, technology is not inclusive by design, all right? It isn't. We have to make it so. And to do this, you need a series of things. You need public consultations on policy development. You need user and expert consultations on product development. You need the mitigation of bias, which again was spoken about. And very importantly, gender and disability sensitive design must be built into these AI solutions, right? And finally, responsiveness. AI is dynamic, all technology is. So these systems really have to keep responding to emerging needs as and when they arise. So to ensure some parity and uniformity, there needs to be a co-creation of standards for EdTech products. The safety by design principles really have to be embedded once again in AI solutions, and so must privacy by design needs be, really. And, I'd just like to conclude, though this is not related to what I just said, Dr. Shadrach's opening point about there being a great opportunity for teachers, not just learners, I really think that needs special emphasis because we do tend to focus on the learner group users. But then what we are seeing in India is a great shortage of adequately trained teachers and educators who can sort of efficiently use AI in the classrooms or to design their lessons plans, etc. So that is something which needs a lot of attention. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Ms. Gupta, from your experience of using EdTech, for underserved children, how do you, what impact have you observed so far? I mean, from the community level perceptions, what are the common hopes and concerns of, say, teachers, parents, community leaders, students? So how do they perceive EdTech or education technology? Are they more hopeful or more scared? And what are their fears and hopes?
Yeah, no, that's a very interesting question. And I'll just refer back to one survey that had happened called the Bharat Survey for EdTech. And this was immediately after COVID, right? And the idea was to almost establish the baseline for how, households that were sending their children either to government schools or affordable private schools, what was the usage of EdTech technology, what was their perception about EdTech, etc. So some interesting findings emerged, right? So the first one was that smartphone penetration at a household level was close to 80% at that point in time, right? I'm talking 2023. So every, almost it was, and now surveys are telling us that it's almost becoming ubiquitous, right? So every household has at least one smart device. The interesting thing was that children were accessing about 70% of children were accessing their parents' phones every day for more than 30 minutes, right? And what were they doing? They were watching YouTube, playing games. When we asked them what type of EdTech do you engage with, the dominant response was YouTube. They knew of no other platform, right? And that was a time when one private sector company was sponsoring a lot of cricket. But even then, right, what is EdTech in their minds is basically YouTube, right? We found very high aspiration levels in parents to do more for their children outside what was happening in school, and tuition was their port of call, right? So I can't remember the exact numbers, but more than, I think, 60-70% of children were going for private tuitions. So when we put it all together, and very interestingly, we are doing round 2 of the Bharat Survey for EdTech this year, where we are also including questions around AI, right? So it's happening in 10 states, 12,500 households. The data will also be public, right? So we can all use the data for any research that we want to do. But I just wanted to talk a little bit about some dipsticks, saying that, look, children are using it. We don't know how to guide them on how to use it, right? And hence, I do believe that, some of the very interesting work that UNESCO has done in creating a framework for AI literacy and a curriculum for that is almost, is in the right direction, right? And in that context, having observed these behaviors, there is a large program that we are working on, which is called AI Samarth, which is a AI literacy initiative for educators, for students, for parents of students going to government schools and affordable private schools. So I think there is huge potential. I think if you're able to educate our children and create that AI literacy and educate our educators, then, in some ways, this group, stops being just passive consumers and they start becoming active contributors.
So, Mr. Teng, we've spoken about a lot of ethical concerns regarding AI, of accountability, bias, lack of data privacy, and stuff like that. But I think if you want to simultaneously maximize all of these, all the ethical principles as well as efficiency and innovation, I think that'll be very challenging. So, eventually we'll have to make some informed trade-offs. How do you navigate this tension? What are the key factors that we should consider for a more balanced approach?
Thank you for that question. Actually, I started off my planning for this, panel by asking that question. And I posed that question to a couple of AI, chatbots, right? To ask, how can India develop ethics of AI in education, but still promote innovation? And it was very interesting because you can see just from that experience across 4 big, big name chatbots that they basically coalesced around a couple of things. I mean, one was an ethical framework. So the starting point was very often develop an ethical framework, and in a certain model, it actually provided citations to UNESCO's recommendations on the ethics of artificial intelligence. This is not education specific. I must clarify. This was actually a recommendation, a document that's publicly available that was adopted by 193 member states. So basically, the vast majority of the world recognize the importance of ethics of AI as front and center in 2021. So imagine the negotiations took, some years before that. So we were well aware of this issue quite far in advance of the generative AI sort of revolution. And as part of that, there are 10 principles, right? number one is do no harm, but one of them is also proportionality. So it's not that ethics has to be the guardrail and restraining all of AI developments, but you must have a sense of what are the limits of how AI should be applied, not least in education. So I think when we're talking about balancing ethics with, let's say, innovation, and we associate innovation with growth and positive things, right? We are kind of seeing ethics as a limiting factor on how we should go forward. I don't think that black and white view of ethics versus innovation is actually quite right, because innovation and growth is only meaningful, especially in today's world, if it's sustainable, if we're not contributing to the climate crisis and our own extinction. You do need to make sure that how we teach our children, how we innovate and do R&D is all guided by a sense of ethics. And within ethics, we include issues of environment. So Shadrach rightly pointed out in his first intervention, there is a cost to using AI. Me using, putting the query into 4 models has an environmental cost. And can that be made lower? Is that a reasonable use of AI? I think there are 10 principles. Many of them have already been mentioned by the esteemed panelists: accountability, transparency, do no harm, proportionality, etc., etc. But I just want to highlight that from UNESCO's point of view, ethics and innovation are not, in opposition, right? So you can have ethical innovation. And in fact, for example, Singapore's approach to AI development is to actually say the government issue guidelines saying businesses and the markets, and players, go ahead and develop AI. Just make sure that you stick within a certain sandbox, right, approach. So they take a sandbox approach to innovation of AI, and they highlight there are certain risks that are considered high risk by the government. And I think this is a kind of similar approach, or not similar, but a leveled approach that the EU AI Act also takes, right? It looks at the risk, and then from there you decide what kind of measures you need to take to mitigate those risks of AI. So I think in the education space, it's just like in healthcare, it's hugely sensitive, right? We're molding young minds. These young minds don't know, as Gauri rightly mentioned, everything you're fed on YouTube is an algorithm, right? They're taking information from you from your geographical location, and they're feeding you what you think you want to know. You're not actually fully in control of what you want to see unless you actively search along certain things, or maybe you switch off, your history or whatever data. All these skills need to be imparted. And personally, I think, just on my last point, teachers are really the key. I think panelists already have mentioned this. There are a shortage of teachers. There are a shortage of qualified, well-trained teachers who have the time as well, right? Let's all be realistic here. Teachers face a terribly hard time handling teaching together with the administrative load. And I'm not even just highlighting in India. This is something that happens in Singapore, in Korea, in China, in the US. Teachers all over the world are under so much pressure. Do they even have the space to think about the ethics of AI, right? And to develop the skills. So I think the key really in terms of ethics of AI in education is having the framework and empowering the teachers plus the school leaders to be the agents of change. They need to have the space and also the time and incentive to teach the learners to be critical, actually to understand that AI is in everything that we see more or less online nowadays. So I think that is really, it goes back to the human. It's not the technology. The technology has certain limitations and opportunities, but it really needs to go back to investing in the people. So I'll just stop here. Thank you.
So, Anipan, you mentioned about policy documents in India which refer to ethics or certain guardrails for AI. How do you assess India's policy readiness, both nationally and state-wise, because education comes under concurrent list? So, and what role can frameworks like DPDP Act and DEPA play in protecting learners' rights?
Right. Okay. Thank you for that. Now, there is as far as India is concerned, there certainly is a great deal of readiness at the policy level. Okay. So in 2018, for example, when India first launched its national strategy for AI, it it identified education as one of 5 priority sectors where AI was ripe for use, basically, right? And it recommended certain niche areas in which AI could be used in education. For example, developing customized learning platforms, smart interactive tutoring systems, producing tools for, predictive tools for identifying potential dropouts, and also very importantly, partly to address this issue of teacher absenteeism, ensuring that teachers are, there is an automated system to sort of post teachers and identify where resources should be allocated. So this was how the National Strategy for AI saw it in 2018. And then much of this thinking actually then shaped the National Education Policy of 2020, which was launched at the height of the COVID crisis. And the NEP 2020 really did consolidate sort of a number of AI related steps into how well, focused on how AI could be used. And some of the very concrete steps that outlined and suggested were using AI to track student performance and growth. And this is also a bit problematic, and I'll come back to that. Strengthening natural language processing for regional languages. And this is important for a country like India with so many dialects and languages, right? So AI should be used not just to strengthen LLPs, but also to teach languages from the kindergarten to the class 12 levels. And finally, of course, there was a feeling in the NEP that there should be a lot more courses at all levels, school, high school, HAIs, higher education institutes, to teach AI, to build awareness and sort of sensitize students of all ages about AI. Right. Now, each of these things that the NEP has identified as priority areas actually come with certain challenges. This matter of student tracking, for example, it's happening. A number of state governments have taken it up. So, you have the governments of Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, Chhattisgarh, Goa, which are actually using AI for tracking student performance and growth in a big way. But then, it's not clear what the government experience has been, but as far as EdTech platforms go, there have been multiple cases of non-consensual digital tracking, right? And then that essentially constitutes a kind of surveillance culture where students are being watched, monitored in the way that social media platforms keep monitoring us without our knowledge. And that, of course, is rather sinister, right? Now, the matter of languages. India has loads of regional languages and vernacular languages, but there is a paucity of data and content in these local languages. So, AI models are still being trained largely on English language content, right? Which automatically means that certain biases, linguistic biases, are being built into those systems, right? So we have to find ways of making vernacular languages much more available to these AI training models. And, one small way of doing that in the education sector is open universities have vast corpuses of regional content. I mean, their syllabi, their course contents are actually designed in these regional languages, right? That's why you have regional state open universities to cater to that need. That is a rather fragmented system at the moment. You have this big IGNOU corpus, and you have different state open universities. If all that can be brought onto a common platform, a sort of national repository of open courses, as it were, that might actually prove to be what can I say, quite a rich test bed for AI models to use. They draw regional language content from there, right? And also the matter of data and privacy. Now, across geographies, there have been lots of cases of data breaches, data theft from children and young learners. And then this is used for hard selling and mis-selling EdTech products and courses to them. That's unethical, of course, right? Now, the DPDP Act is our pioneering data protection regime for us. And this clearly says that a data fiduciary, which means an EdTech platform here, must obtain verifiable parental consent, right, before processing any data of its learners. And it cannot really use any data that it collects to track, target, and advertise to young learners. But then, this again has its challenges, and the DPDP rules, which are basically the things which help operationalize the act, that is under discussion at the moment, and we find that there are a lot of loopholes there. And two of my colleagues at ORF have just written a report about this, talking about some of these loopholes. And certain things that emerge are, I mean, the matter of consent, parental consent, is it needed once? Is it a one-time activity, or do you need it each time some change is made to a child's learning account, for example? All right. A child must self-declare that he is a child within the meaning of the act before he or she uses that platform. But then that is not foolproof by any means. One could simply lie about one's age and use an EdTech platform, right? So there are problems of that kind. And finally, to verify a child's online learning account, parents' sort of government authorized credentials and data are needed, basically Aadhaar cards, numbers. So in order to have a child learning on a platform, you're actually bringing in a lot of parental data, opening that up to the possibility of misuse, data breaches. So you're actually making a system more vulnerable than it could have been, right? So each of these things need to be looked into as you're designing these AI learning platforms. Thank you. I'll stop there.
So, how does India's readiness or the DPDP Act compare to Europe's GDPR? Anyone wants to take this?
I don't think any of us here are legal specialists. Although I have to confess that previously I was a lawyer in Singapore, but no, I think I think that's a very difficult question. I think more like how to understand how the DPDP Act can inform how AI ethics, right, or the ethical use of AI technology in education is more like a useful point to consider. And what I think is that, to a large extent, actually, it's great that India has developed its first data protection act, but it has to adapt to the uniqueness of AI, which is basically data has no borders for the most part, right? So when EdTech companies are working with state government within a certain framework, and I think Gauri would be happy to share about EdTech Tuna and the assessments they've done about certain platforms, ultimately, most of where the data travels will not be in India. Yeah. And there's very limited control that the government of India can impart on this, So it's a very difficult problem to solve. And AI is unique in that sense. The other thing is, I think, for example, knowing that students nowadays are using Google Lens to solve, test problems and quiz questions and all that, that information is unique to their account, probably, right? But then that is not going into any kind of EdTech platform that is adopted by the school or by the state or any sort of government associated entity. So all of that potential learning data is also not, it's not within the purview of the state. So I think that's a very challenging problem. I think the other thing that AI has kind of unleashed is that learning can happen way out of the classroom in all circumstances and all environments, much more than perhaps what we've been advocating for through all the different forums for non-formal, informal, and formal education, which UNESCO categorizes as different forms of learning or different types of learning. But that is something also where our traditional ideas of learning and sort of data protection and kind of gathering all of a person's learning into one space or one place is hugely, maybe becoming very irrelevant, let's say, to be very frank. Yeah.
Maybe I'll just pick on, what Anirban had also mentioned, and thank you, Jian, for bringing in EdTech Tulna. But I think the big question, right, in all our minds was that, look, how do you assess the quality of EdTech, right? Because when we would engage with government, we would see that when they were looking at ICT procurement, they would largely be looking at hardware procurement, right? Because it was very easy to spec the hardware. I need so many computers with this memory and, so much RAM, etc. But it was very hard for them to spec the software, the real power behind any EdTech intervention, which is the learning software. Because, how do you, And because EdTech is so varied, right? The type of EdTech that is most useful for the purposes of remediation is very different from the type of EdTech that a teacher will use to, provide better resources to the student, will be very different from EdTech for practice, right? And EdTech for grades 6 to 12 will look very different from EdTech for grades 1 to 5. What is good in math will be very different from what is good in literacy. So there was the need to create some standards for what good EdTech looks like across all of these use cases of EdTech. And that's where IIT Bombay and CSF partner to build EdTech Tulna. Tulna means comparison, right? And what EdTech Tulna is trying to do is to create standards for what good looks like. Governments use those standards in their RFPs, and the Tulna team builds capacity of government to actually evaluate products against those standards. Now with generative AI coming into the picture and a lot of EdTech solutions getting powered by AI, the added complication is that the output of EdTech solutions is no longer static. It has now become dynamic, right? So every time I engage with a personal tutor, the response that I get is not necessarily out of a list of responses. It is generative response, right? So what Tulna is now trying to do is to say that, look, how do I integrate standards for AI generated output, right? Or AI synthesized output, or AI. So the integration of what standards for AI looks like is now being included in Tulna as well. And I think it's an important one, because otherwise we are giving our children solutions, frankly, that we really don't know are meeting standards of quality on the one side, right? But also safety and ethics on the other.
Thank you. Dr. Shadrach, I want to ask you, so, you mentioned about building teacher capacities for ethical AI. So, there is also another conversation that AI is going to take away jobs of teachers. So, now in education, what do you think are the key risks of over-reliance on AI? Particularly, how can we ensure that technology supports teachers rather than replacing them?
So there's this common saying that AI will not replace teachers, but the teachers who exploit AI and know how to exploit AI would replace the teachers who do not know how to. So this goes on to say that fundamentally every teacher should be aware of AI aware, the least. But that said, it may not be that simple and possible for all the teachers to be AI aware, let alone use and even more so master it. So it may be possible for us to work with cohort of teachers who basically end up exploiting AI and use AI to generate exemplars and a lot of this material that could be put out to teachers who probably do not have that level of access. So oftentimes we say that let's create something for Jumritalaya, where there may not be enough access, enough devices, or people may or may not be able to afford, but still they should be included in the learning revolution, the same way as a kid or a school would deal with in a metropolitan city. So here is where we are hopeful that teachers themselves can inspire their fellow teachers, create and publish, which could go in open domain as open education resources, which could be put out in the hands of a large number of teachers who are out there. So in other words, what we are hoping and envisaging that as many as 11 million teachers in this country would be trained in AI, which would take a lot of time. Can we at least have 1% of them who, on behalf of the other 99, start exploiting AI and make things easier and available, so that even if I'm not a user of AI that actively, but what has been generated for me, could I use it in my language, in my setting, in a manner that my kids could relate with and work with. So that concept may gain some popularity, but sooner than later, I think every teacher would need to be AI aware, so that the fear is mitigated. And also it should be simplified to that extent that teachers should not see AI as a demigod or something of that kind, because it's human creation. And the basics of AI should be known to everyone. But at the same time, I think with governmental interventions, we hope that the 500 crore that has been allocated for the Center of Excellence on AI in Education would only enable us to create another vertical within the DPI, which could be powerful, powering education and supporting teachers in their classroom and outside classroom practice. So that's the hope, but we do not really yet know. We do know that IIT Ropar and Delhi and also Kharagpur, Kanpur, these are the ones that are favorites, but that have taken health, agriculture, and smart cities already. But with regard to education, I don't know who is going to steer it. We also hear that Swayam Plus leading to digital university for the future would be steered by IIT Chennai. But I only hope that all these centers of excellence would produce good for the disadvantaged, not so much for already those who have, kind. That's our hope, and this is where I think discourses like this should be taken seriously. That the actors who are at the helm of affairs should pay some attention to some of the recommendations that you are making, particularly reaching the unreached and also catering to the have-nots.
So, Mr. Teng, in your work across South Asia, what policy or grassroots level examples, best practices, or good practices stand out as models for balancing AI innovation with responsibility? If you can talk about what is happening in some other countries, particularly from Global South, which India can develop on, adopt, learn from.
I think I'll just take the liberty to expand my question a little bit, because we just had a 2 days webinar with over 500 participants across the Asia Pacific region. So when we look at region, we're looking at the Asia Pacific region, and we're basically sharing about the UNESCO AI competency frameworks for teachers and for students, and getting examples from countries on how they have adopted it. And bear in mind, these frameworks were only launched last September, so September 2024. There has not been a lot of time since then for things to take root. But what we've found firstly is that, this approach of an open resource has been very helpful in seeding this idea of ethics. Ethics is one of the core domains across both of the frameworks because it's guided by the UNESCO recommendations from 2021. But there are also other domains in these two competency frameworks. So I just want to cite that, as Shadrach mentioned, it's important for material to be put in the open domain, right? Of course, to be verified and vetted to a certain quality. And we've found that from China to the Philippines to nonprofits such as CSF and also even some nonprofits in Singapore. And also, I think we had an example from Sri Lanka as well. So they've all used these frameworks as let's say, a map, right? A map to go in the right direction. It's not prescriptive. You don't have to adopt the thing wholesale. There are like 5 domains for the teachers and 18 subdomains. There's no need to do all of that. But from our point of view, what we've found is that countries, states or organizations have benefited in designing their programs in alignment with the competency frameworks for teachers and or for students, depending on their needs. I wouldn't go so far as to say this is a best practice because it's only been 10 months, 9 months. There has been no evaluation or impact evaluation or even results from how these have taken root. But I think that is one of the roles of UNESCO, which is norm setting, right? Standard setting. And this is one of the guidance documents that we feel are useful at the global level. So what we've seen so far has been only in the Asia Pacific region, but also it's very relevant in other countries. One thing is that in India, we have heard as well from the ministry that they are using it in certain parts of designing assessment. So we're very positive and very happy to hear about that and have been engaged with them to support them on this aspect. But again, I will not go so far as to say that any of what really anyone is doing is a best practice because it's such a short timeline. And one of the key recommendations from the LLMs that, when I asked how can India develop ethics of AI in education, is that you need to make sure you have a feedback mechanism, monitoring and evaluation to do that. And I really hope that the government, through the Center of Excellence on AI in Education, really builds that into the system because we are often working or flying in the dark, right? We're very happy with outputs. We're very happy with activities completed, trainings completed, but we don't actually know what is the real impact on learning, on attitude, on empowerment, let's say for the disadvantaged groups. So I think that's really critical. So I'll stop there again and see if other panelists have examples to share.
Maybe one minor point that I'd like to add, because we work in 56 Commonwealth countries, of which 48 are developing. And a good number of those are really poor in nature. In all respects, not only in economical terms, but infrastructure and quite a few other yardsticks. There is a lot of expectation from India, from these Commonwealth countries, including a country like Malaysia, which has shown a lot of resilience and also innovation in their own way, particularly in vocational stream and knowledge economy concepts. In the Caribbean, we see a lot of innovations happen in Trinidad and Tobago, who seem to take skilling quite seriously. And AI-enabled skilling is something that they see as a natural way forward. A country like Brunei within the Commonwealth, which is a very rich nation, is quite keen to share their learnings, but their ability to do so as compared to a country like India is very limited because they are very much within in their own settings. At the most, they interact within the ASEAN circles. Whereas of late, in the last 4 or 5 years, we have seen India to be very assertive, very proactive, wanting to be in the global scene. And we have seen the G20 efforts, and also in JIPAI, there is a secretariat being formed here. So a lot of traction could happen if India takes some leadership position, particularly in terms of sharing their tools, techniques, technologies, also content and knowledge products and so on. Because particularly when it comes to education, what is taught in an Indian school in 9th standard biology is not so much different from what is taught in Ghana. But the capacity is huge here. We can solve a lot of problems, which means India could form that kind of a cohort which could help one another, even if a country is not that wonderful in sharing, could be brought to that platform and made to share. And there is an opportunity for us to create a public sharing digital infrastructure across countries where we want to have education diplomacy, if you like.
What does meaningful multi-stakeholder engagement looks like in context of ethical AI in education? How do we ensure that civil society, parents, educators, and even students have a say in AI, in how AI is designed and deployed beyond tokenistic consultation?
Right. Okay, no, thanks for that, Arpan. So, these different stakeholder groups that you just mentioned, NASCOM has a way in which they've sort of begun dividing AI learners, all right? I mean, learners and user groups. And they have like 5 or 6 of these. You have the AI informed, who are at the bottom of the pyramid. So these are people who need AI literacy, AI awareness of the most basic kind. And this would essentially mean very young students. It would mean people in urban, peri-urban, and somewhat rural areas as well, all right, who need to be taught about this new revolution in technology. You have AI users, which is really a broad swath of learners, okay, students from at all school and HAI levels, all right, and this is something that the government has been doing very well, offering courses at all levels. Both public and private schools and institutions, educational institutions, are now offering a wide range of AI sort of training, awareness, and other kinds of courses, so that students actually graduate with a sound understanding of what AI is, even if you're a graduate in the humanities or something like that, right? And then when it comes to your working life, you have AI integrators, you have AI developers and architects, and at the highest level, you have scientists, all right? So we needn't consider that group here. But for everything leading up to the AI scientists, you actually need a lot of scaling of different kinds, and you need multi-stakeholder engagement of different kinds to make any of this happen. I mean, to begin with, we need a lot of STEM in schools. We need to sort of boost the culture of STEM and AI and tech literacy in schools. That needs to be done first through courses, through workshops, through coding hackathons at all levels, all of that. At the college level, this is, at the higher education level, it begins to get really interesting because now the private sector gets involved in a very big way. And across engineering and computer science institutions across the country, we find, the big tech firms, other large technology companies, both Indian and international, working very closely with these educational institutes to co-design curricula, right? To conduct live workshops, to offer internships, and in many cases to even set up full-blown AI centers of learning and labs, right? And this is very, very important because a long prevailing criticism of Indian graduates is that they are not adequately industry ready, right? So they need to be. So this kind of private sector input from people who actually know what industry requirements are is going to be very important. So these are examples of, let's say, private sector, government institutions, the student community all coming together and making this work, right? Teacher training and both public and private institutions are beginning to offer training courses at all levels. So you have NPTEL, you have CDAC, you have the Future Skills Prime, right? They're offering adult learning and professional courses in AI. This sort of boosts the ecosystem. Training educators, and this is the point to which I come back again. Training educators and teachers is going to be very, very important because last year a couple of years ago, there was this nationwide survey of school teachers at all levels, K to 12. And it was found that, only 30% of the teaching community is actually still proficient with digital tools. Digital tools was a little widely defined, but only 30% of them probably know how to use MS Word, etc., competently, right? Only 31.4% can manage learning management systems. LMSs are still kind of alien to most teachers at the school level. Now, obviously, these are skills teachers need to have if they want to evolve to AI use and the exploitation of AI for education, right? And finally, only about 15% can actually manage an AI classroom or a lab. So these numbers are not very encouraging at the moment, but they will improve as different stakeholders come together and work. Now, it's wonderful to have UNESCO and CSF here because intergovernmental organizations, civil society organizations like CSF, they're really the ones who bring all these different stakeholders together. So they have this convening power, which most other, as neutral parties, they bring a convening power to the table, which most other organizations would lack. So really, they play a a stellar role when it comes to international standard setting, and we just heard about that, and we have the AI ethics here on the table, for example, right? And all these policy consultations that take place, these multi-stakeholder consultations, it's really civil society and INGOs who are the most, the most trusted entities for making all of this happen. So these are the different kinds of ways and the different kinds of institutions that need to work together to take AI forward. Yeah.
I think it's very comprehensively covered, nothing to add from my side.
I think we have a lot of experience with the Internet Governance Forum. Many rounds of these where multi-stakeholders are engaged. But with regard to AI, we have not seen many such for yet, other than the Global Partnership on AI, which seems to promote multi-stakeholdership, but with GPI merging with OECD, we do not really know the future of GPI from a multi-stakeholder point of view, because it's quite possible that the membership may not be expanded beyond the 29 countries that are currently a part of. So it's important for us to take lessons from the Internet Governance Forum and scale it to this level. But I hardly see many discourses happen at an intergovernmental level, although off and on these things come up in education ministers meeting, like the one that we co-convene, the Commonwealth Education Ministers meeting every 2 years. There is a greater recognition for digitalization, and more so these days for the impact of AI. But I would think that it should not remain as lip service and slogans. Should go down in terms of actual programs and activities, like the ones my co-panelists mentioned. But I would take it with a caution that so far we have not seen that level of major multi-stakeholder intergovernmental engagement, other than what UNESCO has done in terms of in 2021 the group that they brought together, the 190 countries and others. But we need to intensify this action.
Yeah, I think just let me have one last input. I think when we look at multi-stakeholder engagement, UNESCO is working with government of India, right, on assessing the readiness of the system, of the AI ecosystem, on the ethics of artificial intelligence. And this is a key implementation following this UNESCO recommendation in 2021. But this is it's a multi-sectoral, nationwide consultation that is not focused on education. So for me, I see two kind of levels of multi-stakeholder engagement. One is, of course, on an overall AI, generic, so to speak, AI consultation. But the specificities of education, especially in India, are so unique. There's no chance that this UNESCO and MIT collaboration on a national assessment can adequately respond to the uniqueness of India's education system. So when we talk about multi-stakeholder engagement in shaping inclusive, let's say, an accountable AI policy, there has to be another level, another round of consultations in the specific domain of education. And one thing that I want to share that UNESCO has noticed, in these discussions of AI is the issue of gender disparity. And as part of that work, and part of this ethics of AI work, we have a global Women for Ethical AI network, which the South Asia chapter was just recently launched 4 months ago. So also, when we talk about inclusivity, there's so many categories or aspects, but let me just focus specifically on gender, where we know that, women in AI account for less than 10%, right, of jobs, like there's what do you call that, representation in occupations. And also just let's say in this panel, and also in other panels that we have seen across the region and globally, there is a significant lack of women representation. And that is just an easy starting point to highlight that the technology and the discussions and the discourse need to be expanded, need to have true stakeholder, multi-stakeholder engagement to be inclusive, right? And I'm not even going to talk about the accountability aspect, but I just want to highlight that, this is just one small example that we can all understand in very tangible terms. So I will just end there, and thank you so much for all your questions.
Thank you. For the audience, please introduce yourself, ask your question, and also indicate who the question is for.
Hello, I am Vishwa Patel and I come from Miranda House. My question is to Sir Anirban Sharma that since AI ethics are now part of normative soft power, this invites a strategic lens. My question is, what role India play in shaping global norms for ethical AI in education through platforms like G20, Quad and SCO, especially when we see increasing ideological and regulatory divergence between the West, China and the developing world?
Myself, Rudra Pratap, a student of political science in Delhi University. Sir, I want to know something regarding in term of accountable and transparency. Sir, who is responsible if any AI system gives a student wrong or biased feedback? Then who is accountable? And if there is any biased or wrong feedback, then there is any legal action against him?
So my question is from Gauri ma'am. Like you said, you mentioned about the Bharat survey for EdTech that happened in 2023. So my question is that smartphone, I know that almost every household has at least one smartphones. But ma'am, having only smartphones and not having that stimulation, that strategy, how to use it, that someone who is a mentor who can tell you how to use it, how ma'am, how that those kids who are very poor kids, whose father and whose mothers are very illiterate, or
First generation learners.
yes, like those who are, we can say example like जो brick manufacturing में काम करते हैं, those people. So ma'am, how can they learn from AI? How can they use? Because they are not well equipped to understand the UNESCO guidelines as well. And their locality is not that much advanced that they will understand those things. So ma'am, this is my question.
So we'll take one more question and then, please. Go ahead.
Hi, I am Advocate Aditi Mendirata and I actually practice in data privacy law. And I just wanted to add a quick thing regarding the question that you posed regarding GDPR and DPDPA. One, it's very sad that I don't think these two laws are comparable, because one, GDPR is actually in action while IR is basically just suspended in the air with no date of enforcement still in sight. And my question is that, see, I interact with people, big data people all the time, and what happens is that since the system is already in place, they'll come to us and ask us what are the loopholes. If you want to build a forward thinking law, you will have to act on it as and when the system is developing, as and when the innovation is happening. So what are your thoughts, and this is to the entire panel, what are your thoughts on self-regulatory bodies and how effective are they? Especially if you just constrain it to one particular industry, let's say for instance, education. How impactful or how much of a power can it yield on a ground level is what I would want to ask.
Who are you asking primarily?
Entire panel.
Okay. So they'll decide who wants to take your question. Just one last question, please. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Swapnil and I'm a digital marketing student and I volunteer at NGOs. My question is to Sajrat sir and Gauri ma'am, that in your initial interventions you talked about, like she said that there are smartphones in almost all the households and everywhere. So like my NGOs, we go to different rural areas, right, to help the students and to get them admissions in basically government schools, right? So there we have seen that
a place where books are not provided at the first place, and we're talking about providing them AI based education. So what can the government do about it to to integrate AI not only in the private schools, not only in the urban areas, but also in the rural areas?
So yes, your question about how India is shaping AI developments on the world stage, ethical frameworks, etc. These happen through multilateral engagement largely. All right, so it's not one country by itself trying to shape how AI is going to sort of or try to influence nations in that manner. Groups like the G20, or even bodies like the Global Partnership for AI, right? India is a member state. In some cases, India has been a founding member. Like India was a founding member of GPay, for example, right? So as parts of these larger coalitions, India's voice is an important one, as a large emerging economy, as a tech powerhouse, etc. And it is through consultation and cooperation of this kind that India then influences AI developments in other parts of the world. The G20 is like that as well, right? Uh, a couple of years ago, when India was G20 president's DPI, digital public infrastructure was a major plank of India's interventions. It used that year of its presidency to really promote the DPI message across the world, and that has gained a lot of traction. We didn't quite do that to the same measure with AI, but then other subsequent G20 presidencies are focusing on AI. And again, India is a strong voice in those consultations, right? Again, when it comes to these instruments like the UNESCO recommendation on the ethics, intergovernmental bodies are, represented by member states also, right? So India is one of the member states of UNESCO. India is a member state of the Commonwealth of Learning, right? So it's through engagements across these bodies that some of these recommendations are developed. That's how it goes. And from time to time, there are all these other AI safety and responsible AI declarations that are made. For example, a major one was made at Bletchley Park some time ago. The Bletchley Park Declaration on Safe AI. Again, our Minister of Electronics and IT, Rajiv Chandrasekhar, he was one of the major voices on that platform, pushing for that and promoting the idea of safe and responsible AI, right? So that's how India is a part of these larger global engagements and is doing this. And to the other question about the role of self-regulation, that's actually pretty important. Industry self-regulation is important, especially when you're trying to set these ethical and normative frameworks and standards. And here in India, the Internet and Mobile Association of India has set up something called the Indian EdTech Consortium, which has developed its code of conduct, which essentially seeks to determine or at least monitor cases of unsafe and irresponsible use of AI and other technologies. So self-regulation is important. And a lot of other countries, Australia, the UK, they all have very, very strong and robust self-governance codes as well for industry. So thank you.
Yeah, maybe I can start with a question around how do we actually your questions are in some ways related, so I'll try and address both of them together. So the question is basically around saying that look, devices may be available in the households, but given the literacy levels of the students and their parents, how do we ensure that children are using these devices and are learning with EdTech, right? And I think the related question was that books are not available, right, in the schools, but and hence how can we imagine a world where our education system is able to use AI, right? So I think on the it's a very real question, right? And when I frankly came into the Central Square Foundation and came into the space of EdTech, that was a big question in my mind, right? That we are talking about books being available only after 5 months of the session starting, etc. And here we are talking about personalized adaptive learning and saying that. So there are two ways in which EdTech gets used within any system, right? You can use it in school or you can use it at home. When we are talking about usage of technology within the school system, it means that you have to create the full way. And that is where EdTech can't do it by itself. There is a huge responsibility of a learning agent who is either the teacher or the parent who is nudging the child in a certain way. So whenever we talk of an effective EdTech intervention, it brings three elements together. It brings the hardware, it brings the EdTech software, and it brings the program or the learning agents into the picture. So we've seen this, right? If EdTech is just available in B2C models for children to use, you will see that, oh, there's a huge excitement. I see an app, I use it for one day, I drop off. And we all know that unless you're using something consistently, there is no learning happening. But the moment you introduce a learning agent into this whole mix, right, and it becomes a teacher-directed at-home learning model, you see a very high level of engagement and retention, right? So to the point that, and we keep talking about the role of teachers, right? But I do believe that unless we get this learning agent in the teacher in the loop, right, EdTech, frankly, at home is not going to be effective. In the school, there is the barrier of saying that, look, I need to create the infrastructure. So I think we've seen the education system, going down both paths. In the first path, which is in the school, it's easier to get dosage for EdTech because you put a child into a lab and, they're engaging with the EdTech solution. But there, the barrier to adoption is around the infrastructure. At home, the barrier is around how do I get my child to spend 10 minutes on a learning solution, right? It's hard to get them to do homework. Now we are saying, we get them to spend time on and there the importance of the learning agent. The other question on just the AI, right? The question is that what do we mean by when we say introduce or make our systems AI powered? Are we saying that, look, every child is querying a GPT, right? And in my mind, that's not the way to introduce AI, right? But it's saying that, look, we introduce AI-powered tools that can help them with their learning, right? Whether it is in the form of personal tutoring, whether it is in the form of teachers having the ability to generate their own content or their lesson plans, etc., right? So that is part of EdTech currently as well, right? So the idea is that, look, technology is getting integrated. One of the things of technology integration is it is getting powered by AI. And I think we see a big shift in government attitude towards EdTech as well, right? Pre-COVID, it used to be, let's experiment with EdTech. Now everyone's saying you cannot ignore it. It's a part of how education will happen in the future. So that would be my comment. But Kshetraj, you have something to add?
I think the point about books vis-a-vis all these digital objects is something that it's a century-old discourse because many societies promoted reading culture through the establishment of freely accessible library facilities and access to books in particular. And there have been concerted efforts to promote that reading culture. And in India, despite various attempts, we have not seen much traction, to be very candid, including the common service centers that have come about in almost 200,000 villages in the country. The original intent was to turn this into knowledge centers, where community-enabled knowledge centers would come about. And the models that we see in certain countries like Brazil, Malaysia, Chile, and others would be emulated here, where books and digital content would coexist. But despite even 2 years ago, the finance minister had made available a huge funding opportunity for creating panchayat-based libraries, and we have not seen many come about. So there has been a problem in delivery and implementation of all these very noble ideas. Rather, we saw the National Digital Library of India, which my colleague was a part of, which was a huge project of the Ministry of Education in our country. But there are opportunities now. Now, looking at a large number of repositories, databases, libraries that have not been brought together. NDLA is a good example of how they tried bringing together the metadata of various holdings within the country. And to a large extent, they were successful in bringing a large amount of data. But that said, there's a lot in gray and unpublished in a variety of forms which could be exploited further, provided AI-powered solutions are put in place, where you could, as much the large language models go and harvest the existing content that's largely US-based English language content. I think we need to see a paradigm shift in terms of indigenous models, AI models that harvest content within in multiple languages, but also using translation software like Bhashini, Anuvadini, and others, enable people to consume reliable, quality information and knowledge objects that are available within our geography. That's something that one should look at in order to mitigate this whole problem of people not having access, not even to books, let alone AI-powered EdTech solutions. But with a simple mobile phone, the statistics is also stunning. Once upon a time, we were all dependent on feature phones, but today we have low-cost mobile phones are available, smartphones are available in most of the households. But I think the meaningful connectivity and meaningful access to all these devices is the biggest issue. What is it used for? Is it used for looking at reels and YouTube, entertainment content, or is it used for meaningful, including entertainment, but to a large extent building oneself in line with what the NEP talks about. These are all issues that we need to grapple with in the near future. There needs to be a public campaign. There needs to be a lot of AI literacy programs all around. There should be playbooks. The same mobile phone should alert you as much it harvests your content, should inform you of the cybersecurity and the responsible use of these gadgets and AI-based solutions. So there's a lot that we need to do in a developing economy of our kind. And I think multi-stakeholder, public-private partnerships, and also the non-governmental entities like CSF and ORF, and all of you need to put your best foot forward to answer these questions. The question doesn't lie with the government. We have seen 5,000 crores introduced, but no action on the ground. There's no panchayat library which is benefited from that announcement 2 years ago. In the same way, we don't want to see many of those announcements go unutilized. Rather, citizenry, civil society-led responsible movement would enable us to turn things around.
Jan, do you want to briefly take the point on self-regulating bodies? And then we can close.
No, I think Anirban did a great job with that already. So
one minor example, it's part of the Facebook's oversight body, when they were talking about, Facebook was under the radar because of, it was criticized for many reasons. So what they did, Mark Zuckerberg came up with an idea of a oversight body. So he put together a very high-paid, set of people. They went around actually, asking the multi-stakeholders of the opinion on their own oversight body. But they ran it for only 2 years, and they didn't know how to really manage. So a company coming up with its own oversight or self-regulation perhaps will not work. All the stakeholders should come together to, there's something like the media, the print media at least has, they have a self-regulation body. Similar to that, we need to have on the social media some attempt to be made. But I would rate the Facebook's oversight body as a good example of a failure.
So thank you to all my panelists for a very insightful discussion. I think I'd conclude by using two main discussion points. I think AI is yet to demonstrate its efficiency, and ethics and innovation should go hand in hand. And we have to take a very cautious optimism, as they say. The other very important conclusion is that children and parents, they view AI in education with a lot of aspiration. So we have to really, for AI to fulfill the promise in education, teachers are really the cornerstone, and we have to invest a lot in their readiness and their capacity building. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope it was an insightful discussion for all of you.